In my time at Panera, we put a big shift into digital. So adding ordering kiosks, mobile order ahead, added delivery. And what we had to figure out was with all of that complexity, we couldn't figure out what would happen over 2,000 cafes. We had to figure out what would happen with that in one cafe.
I know all of you are already successful in what you do, but gosh, is there so much that we all can learn about finances? Most times learning about finances is like a complete no man's land in our business, right? We just kind of run by the seat of our pants and we wonder, like, how do we do financial planning in a smart way, but also not so thorough and so detailed to the point where we, go into paralysis by analysis. I know I am super excited about this. So Mike, I know that you're here and I am super honored that you're taking, 25 minutes with us to go through some of your secrets around what we're calling Fortune 500 financial planning. So thank you for coming on to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Thanks for having me. I didn't realize you're going to have that fancy a name. So I hope we're not over-promising just a little bit with that.
Yep. So we had some questions we put together. So I'd like for you to maybe start off by sharing your transition from going from, the CFO of Panera to now AllBirds, where you're at, and what that transition was like, it's such a high level role.
Yeah. So going back, I had been with Panera for 10 years when I left. Yeah. I had the dumb luck, good fortune of leaving Panera in February of 2020. So just before COVID really hit home here. And it had been a planned transition for me. So I had taken a little while and had been transitioning to a new CFO. And, honestly, my plan was to really take some time and think hard about what I wanted to do next. And what I really kind of came to is this conclusion that I wanted to go to a smaller company, an earlier stage company, but still keep some of the magic of what I had at Panera, which was a founder-led business, a really strong culture, a business that has a positive impact on the world, and products that are part of people's lives every day. So what surprised me about the transition once I started at AllBirds in January of 2021 was, in concept, it sounds great to go from a big company that's a little bit older, that has a lot of infrastructure, to go to a small company that has a little bit less. The reality is there's some stuff where you're like, wow, I'm really impressed we have that. And other times you're like, whoa, like, what do you mean we don't do this right now? So it was an interesting transition for me, but I tried to approach it with the headspace that the company had done everything it had done up until that point for a really good and logical reason. And I wanted to understand that and take my transition from a place of learning and gathering information and not of judgment. And I think that's an important thing when anybody starts a new role or starts a new business or gets into doing something slightly different. Really start from this place of you want to learn, not judge, because you'll just absorb so much more if you have that attitude.
Such a key takeaway there. I think for any of us who get involved with even new lines of business, or different businesses, entering with a curious mind rather than a critical mind. So one thing I just have to get this off my chest is, like, as we grow our company, I always keep thinking, like, what's the next level? And I hit a stop, and Dan Sullivan in Strategic Coach calls it a ceiling of complexity, right? Where entrepreneurs hit a ceiling to where they don't actually understand what that next level looks like. And I can't even conceive, like, being the CFO of a company as large as, like, a Panera, for example. And I guess what I'm trying to understand is, how do you perceive managing that amount of complexity, like thousands and thousands of employees and budgets that impact thousands of locations, and like one financial decision can have an impact on probably thousands of people. Like, how do you detach from maybe the day-to-day and actually really lead from that high of a level in such a large business?
Yeah, there's a few good questions in there. So on that level of complexity, whether it's, at AllBirds, where I think about one store, right? We have 35 physical stores today, or one pair of shoes, or at Panera, we'd ask ourselves, like, what happens in one cafe? Because it can seem overwhelming to say, oh, as a system, we do $5 billion in sales. That seems impossible, right? But then if you break it down and say, okay, one bakery cafe at Panera when I was there did about $3 million a year in sales. Break that down a little further. That's about $55,000 a week in sales. Okay, So how does that $55,000 a week in sales come together? Well, it kind of happens this on the weekday, this on the weekend, this much at breakfast, this much for delivery, this much for catering. And when you keep breaking it down into its component parts, that lets you do a couple things. One, it gets rid of the overwhelming nature of the numbers themselves, and hopefully doesn't make it feel like nearly as scary. But two, what it lets you do is problem solve or think through the implications of the decisions you're trying to make. So, in my time at Panera, we put a big shift into digital. So adding ordering kiosks, mobile order ahead, added delivery. And what we had to figure out was with all of that complexity, we couldn't figure out what would happen over 2,000 cafes. We had to figure out what would happen with that in one cafe. How much sales would it generate? What kind of labor would we have to handle the complexity? What would it ultimately cost us to be able to do that and what could we bring to the bottom line? If we felt confident in one, then we applied it to multiple stores, and then we applied it across the whole system over time. And I think regardless of the size of your business, depending on if you're hitting that complexity point that you're talking about, Bill, step back and ask yourself, why are we trying to put these changes in? Why are we trying to, do this? Is there a big strategic reason? Are we feeling a competitive threat? Am I going to serve my clients and my customers better, right? And then ask yourself, can I break down the complexity into its component parts and measure, am I getting that outcome? And am I getting it at a price that I can appreciate?
I love that. It's kind of like intelligent investor type thinking. So you brought up digital earlier than I expected, but I want to go right there because when we were looking at AllBirds and just the amazing success that you're leading, at AllBirds, we noticed that 194 million of the 219 million generated, I think, a few years ago was through digital revenue, which is substantial, right? And I wanted to kind of, being the CFO of a company that, like Panera, when you did the digital shift and the kiosks and all those digital pushes that you did, but also at AllBirds, where 80% it seems of the revenues coming through digital.
Yeah.
How do you think about the digital consumer? And then also, how do you think about making investments in digital when maybe you can't really track the ROI of everything perfectly?
Yeah. So I had, you called the digital consumer. I just think it's the consumer. I think about one of the things one of the questions that you guys said ahead of time, I'm sure we'll talk about, is what has changed, in COVID in business. And I think the reality is I think customers were already moving towards this need for a seamless experience across a physical retail channel, a digital channel. Sometimes digital means I order it and you deliver it to my house in a couple hours. Sometimes it means I'll get it when I get it. Sometimes it means I want to walk into the store 2 hours from now and pick it up, right? I think it's all one customer. And if you go back to the problem you're ultimately solving for with your customers is they want convenience and they want reliability out of your business. So I think for the folks, who are on this call or on the Zoom and are going to listen to this later, I think that's going to be one of the realities of how your business is changing, right? If you are serving clients, your clients are going to want that same level of convenience. Things like Zoom meetings are probably here to stay, right? That's going to be the reality of it. They may want to interact with you or access documents or whatever it is in a totally different way than they did before. And that goes to your second part of your question about when is it worth it to make the investment? I mean, in a perfect world, we would have a really good model built out ahead of time. It would perfectly predict what will happen. And then we'll say, we're going to get this kind of return. And that's what happens. The reality is business doesn't work that way. Consumer businesses, client services businesses, that's not how they work. So then you get into this question of, if I did this and it didn't work, am I okay with having put this investment out there? Okay, sort of worst case scenario it. And if you think that's a relatively low possibility, then it's okay, do it, put it out there. If what you really get into is there's a likely range of outcomes around this decision, and I can live with the low end, and I'm really excited about the high end, that's another time you do it and you kind of make that leap of faith. I think it's the founder of Intuit has this great line that I use all the time about, he's like, for every one of our failures, we had spreadsheets that look beautiful ahead of time. And that's the reality. Every company has that, right? Every business has that. You have a model that told you this is the right thing to do, and it can be a failure. And you just have to be resilient if something doesn't work the way you expect.